This week I don't really have that much, just some odds and ends. Welcome. And this first part is a little share by Sam of a cathedral in Japan. He says, "Do you think the Japanese just really appreciated European cathedrals and decided to build one?" And he has a great point. A plain truth staring us in the face. Do we really think all these cultures just appreciated each other's architecture and recreated it to the T? Or is it more likely that this was one people that shared an architectural style amongst many other things that must have existed in peace all throughout this realm? And how will you know a people? How can we know 100, 1,000 years later if we have no clear records? And we will know them through their arts, through their architecture and sculptures. And this is staring us all in the face and completely goes against the mainstream narrative. What we see versus what we are told. And here's this beautiful cathedral that Sam has shared with us. And you can see what I mean. This baby is just a model. And I apologize if I seemed a little bitter in that video a few back. Perhaps I was a little down that day, but my point was, they're all the same. This baby is a cookie cutter, an exact replica of what we see in Europe, in the Americas, and as beautiful as it is, it's nothing special once you begin to see hundreds of them. And we know them as Aztec, not places of worship. And here I wanted to discuss petrification. Much controversy within our little community, but yet we all agree that things are much different than we're told. Here are my thoughts on petrification. When does this research become ridiculous? I think when it becomes extreme. I try to avoid saying everything is absolutely this or that. I think there's always exceptions. And personally, I've seen examples lending credibility to all of these theories. In this example, as to what rocks may be. My whole life I've been into rocks, always collected them, studied them, and one of my favorites were petrified tree rocks. Whether it was a little bit just lying on a trail, or all the remains that we see at the petrified forests, for example. And I don't want to bicker with anybody, and I won't, but very generally, I'll point out that petrified trees do exist. I recently heard somebody say that there is nothing organic in this realm pertaining to rocks and mountains, and very, as a matter of factly, stating that there is nothing natural and organic. Biology does not petrify, to paraphrase this person, and this inspired me to share this in a segment, this extremism. And I do believe in melted castles. I've seen enough evidence, and even in the historical narrative, calling these structures castles, especially in the Middle East, not so much in America. But again, to say that there's no biology, and that biology cannot petrify, is a statement that seems to be forgetting the absolute obvious. And so I thought I would just scroll through some images of petrified trees. And I think with this very basic understanding that I think came long before any alternative research, we can now begin to move forward beyond the academics and realize that if a tree can petrify, so can everything else organic in the right conditions. And I look forward to getting back out to the petrified forest. A fascinating reminder of our true narrative. No explanation needed. This is a part of our past. And this next part is just a bunch of grand thoughts on some past videos. So I'm just sitting here, and I feel like maybe we just beat around the bush looking at this building, that canal, cathedral, or monument, and we speculate on the impossibility of the people in this early time to build all these wonders. We can show the small population in a particular area, of course cutting half of that number down based on women and children, and that alone should be a proof that the narrative is false. And that's just if an entire population was working on one building. But if we're to imagine a people moving to an area, everybody's going to be building themselves homes first, and one home could take up to a couple years if you're building it by yourself or with your small family. In my case, I've been working on my house for over 10 years. Maybe it'll never be complete. Of course, we all have jobs. It would be nice if we could just exclusively focus on one thing. But back to my point. This kiln in Salt Lake City and its narrative has fallen apart, has completely hit a wall as far as I'm concerned. And unfortunately, I didn't stress this enough in the video. I've had days now to ponder my investigation, and I thought it was enough that I found the second kiln, below street level, buried, now turned into a retaining wall, covered in ivy, and absolutely seeming more like a drainage than a kiln. Why would they build a kiln? Up in a mountain where it's going to be so difficult to get a horse and wagon up. You don't want to bring a horse up a mountain with a load, not really equipped with brakes, coming back down with how many tons of lime? But of course you don't build a kiln underground. And when I poked my phone in the lower kiln, we saw zero traces of burning on the inside. And again, for me, this is enough proof that the narrative is BS. But again, while pondering, I've come up with the greatest narrative shatterer. And that is, it's safe to say, according to the narrative, that this is the first thing they built in all of Salt Lake City. Without the lime, you're not making mortar and laying concrete footers and foundation. Nothing happens until this lime problem is solved. And we're told they waltzed up into the mountains and built this lime kiln. Again, if you saw the video, almost no information given about this lime kiln. Only some article stating that Brigham sent people up to burn lime. And I joked in the video that they may have told him, we'll see you in a couple years. And I say that because you have to build these kilns, you have to quarry the stone, you have to chop down timber to have fires in the kilns, to heat the stone to make the lime. And as you saw in the picture, there's no forests around, pretty dry hills. And finally, my last point, and perhaps the most important point, is the lime kilns are built with thousands of brick. In fact, the whole interior appeared to be brick, and the outside was a kind of crappy stone, and perhaps that was the renovation. But still not the most important point. This is kind of a what came first, the chicken or the egg scenario. What came first, the brick or the lime? Because here we're using thousands of bricks to construct kilns in the hills before they have acquired lime. We're told this happened in 1850, pretty much within the first year or so of the Mormons arriving, and the only way we could accept this is by imagining that the pioneers carted wagons full of bricks across the west so they could begin construction of these kilns immediately. Otherwise, there's not supposed to be anything but Indians in the Salt Lake Valley. And perhaps the only thing that we can logically conclude in this particular story is the brick came first. But I'm very excited. I feel like many puzzle pieces are coming together. And this doesn't even look original. If you saw my past video, we were even told they renovated 2/3 of it. And really, from the remains that we see, it looks like it was just a big cover-up. This doesn't make any sense over on this side. You can clearly see this crude stone has been put over the brick. And finally, I don't even think this is a lime kiln. I believe it had something to do with water. And again, the kiln is supposed to be constructed in 1850, and yet somehow down the road, they've managed to build this state prison at the same time, 1850. The Sugar House State Prison, a glorious castle, columns, a massive wall, full of mortar, which would have used lime. So how can it be that the Mormons arrive and are able to build structures like this within the first couple years, and yet when we research the lime kiln that should have been built within the same few years, all history is forgotten, and we find lime kilns buried underneath street level, and everyone just seems to have forgotten. Again, this is the most important building, if we're to believe the narrative. In fact, this would have been the first building built, aside from shelter. This becomes your most important enterprise, not the temple, for without this kiln, you're constructing no temple, you're constructing no prisons, and manufacturing no bricks. Well, that's it for today. I do hope you enjoyed, and do have a blessed day. Please like, comment, and subscribe. When I was 16, I found myself here in Paris with my sister and father and my father's friend's daughter. And they were just rushing through this arch, and there were shops all around. And I told everyone, wait a minute. And I had a small point-and-shoot 35mm camera, and I was in awe. I began snapping photos at the interior here, and everything was clear to me. This was too great. And as I looked around at all the people mindlessly shuffling to and from various shops, it was so clear. And I think it was designed, at the very least, to do just this. Just what it had done to me caused me to pause and reflect. There was wonder all over this thing. It was screaming our past and wondrous history. And I still have those old photos. Perhaps I'll share them here. And these are the structures of another people. I believe the original man, who was much taller in stature than ourselves, but yet a man, the original. And these are from what we would call a past age. And as I'd mentioned in a past video, I believe this wipeout of these people happened before the Spanish Inquisition. And these stories of the Inquisition are the beginning of our narrative. And I don't believe that it's a true story. I believe it's a false narrative. But there is truth in it. And that's where we begin to see the shuffling and reorganizing of people. And let's say you began the shuffling and reorganizing of the new breed of people. Let's say you began in the 1500s with horse and buggy. Let's consider it begins somewhere in Europe. It's going to take you 300 plus years of procreating and settling and reestablishing all of these cities throughout the realm. And still today, not able to justify the populations. What I mean is, cities are still abandoned today, and we're told stories of why they were abandoned that don't make sense. Programs everywhere, selling homes for $1, as I've touched on in past videos. And it would take a long time, which is why we see empty photos void of people in the 1850s. And it takes about 20 or 30 years after that point before we start seeing populated cities and towns, especially moving outward from Central Europe. And by the time the trains and eventually automobile is in full force, there are very little places that haven't been populated. The ones that haven't been populated or dealt with are usually restricted areas or communist nations if there's too much to deal with. Recently I heard a channel say that they could build any of these structures, and I challenge anybody to build such a structure. Even a 10th or a 100th of the scale would be quite an accomplishment. I remember watching a New Earth video, and she gave such an account of people simply trying to renovate one of these arches. It may have been the Brandenburg Gate in Germany. And she said they couldn't even cast the ornamentation on top properly. They had cast it too heavy, where the material from the old world had been a lighter weight bronze, much thinner, that didn't burden the structure like the sculptures made in modern times. And that's a far cry from rebuilding the structure from scratch, but I think it proved the point. Nobody has ever created an old world structure such as this. And what is this? There's enough material here to build a small skyscraper, and yet what is the function? We would be told this is some symbol of triumph, some war or battle, and nobody even knows what it is. And most people don't care, as I experienced in my teens, just oblivious. And as we know, all the old structures are some sort of tech, and these archways, found all throughout our realm, built in the same glorious fashion, must be some very important piece of technology. This is not just some monument. And when I came into this structure, I was immediately drawn to the center under the archway, and looking up at the artworks and intricacy found in all the detail overhead, and it really seemed like a machine, too perfect, too organized to just be merely art. And these days, I view it as some sort of portal, some kind of teleportation airport. And here you arrive to the city center, and you can go in any direction. This point is like a hub. And I think that's all I wanted to say. Please let me know what you guys think.